I think the key challenge of mass housing is that it's so massive. So I think that it's always related to a very large scale development, which is really doesn't relate to the human scale somehow. So what we're trying to do is to always kind of break that down to a smaller scale, and then to see how we can bring people together. What we see is that usually, well, you see very often, you see large slabs, and then there is where, I don't know, 3,000 units are in, or maybe even just 500, that then share a courtyard. And we think that that is a very anonymous way of living. Usually, units that work really well are like 8 families or something like this, where you can still keep track if somebody moves out and somebody new moves in. You have time to ring the doorbell and introduce yourself, and you know who your neighbors are. So that, I think, is a challenge relating to efficiency of construction, because usually, mass housing it's a reason why it's usually just copying the same floor plan 10 times on top of each other. That is, of course, much cheaper to build, but especially it is much cheaper to design. I don't really believe that complex buildings are much more expensive to build. They're much more expensive to design. So it takes effort of the architect to do that. It's much easier to just copy paste the same floor plan. The other challenge is in construction, because I do think that we have to switch from a modernist way of thinking, in which we created the perfect living condition for a designated target group. So housing is not a consumer product, so it's not, but we're still applying logics of consumer products to housing. So, if I want a phone, or if I want maybe a car, or I don't know, a certain type of shampoo, marketing people are making a perfect effort to really understand me, understand my desires, all these kind of things. But those are products that I use for a year, maybe, or for shampoo, I use it for a couple of weeks. And then if I change my lifestyle, I change the shampoo that I like. With housing, that should not be the case. Ideally, I still have the ideal that you can live your whole life in the same area, in the same neighborhood. So my ideal house is a house that can transform, and that I can change, and that, when my family expands, I expand the house, or I buy the apartment on top of me because it just became free. These kind of things. And so what I think is that developers are putting their effort in the wrong place. So they're trying to create the perfect condition, high quality finishes, all these kind of things. While people, maybe they just want a casco house, they just want a shell where the basics are done. Heating is in there, there is a roof that is not leaking, there's windows, but the internal division, where to place the kitchen, what kind of kitchen, how to divide the rooms, that can be left up to the tenant. Everybody now with YouTube videos knows how to build almost everything. So there's a lot of stuff you can do yourself that a developer doesn't need to do anymore. Well, mixed use is, well, first of all, it's important because it's actually not so easy to do, but mixed use is important because it reduces traffic, which is, I think, a big problem in a lot of cities. I'm not saying that everybody works in the house where he lives, but potentially, let's say, if so mixed use will eliminate, the whole outer ring of the city moving at 9 o'clock in the morning to the center of the city, and in the afternoon moving out again. So, but it will be much more of a crisscross movement, so it will even out traffic. It's also, it has an aspect of safety. So, a living or a residential neighborhood, in these kind of suburban neighborhoods, You have a lot of burglaries. They don't happen at night. They happen, you know, during work hours when people when the whole neighborhood has left their houses and nobody's at home anymore. The same with business districts. They become dangerous places at night because there's no people anymore. So just mixing these things and reducing the need for motorized transport, I think that is the big benefit of mixed use. And then how do you achieve mixed use? That is actually not so easy. So because commerce has gone either very large scale or moved to the internet and internet trade. So there is not so many, you know, small shops that can fill the whole ground floor of a residential neighborhood. So you have to find a very delicate mix of you know, placing the commerce where it's viable, where it can sustain itself, and where there is enough people, you know, going to the shops so that they can sustain themselves, and finding other useful uses, especially for the ground floors in other areas. But you know, there's plenty of concepts and ideas. I would probably actually always opt for flexibility in those areas. Yeah, I think the architecture of the future should focus much more on strategies than on design. I think we're maybe out of a kind of Beaux-Arts tradition, we're still educated of being great designers and creating a perfect product. And I can tell you from my experience that that can be very frustrating, because your product will never be as you imagined it. It will never reach 100%. So, but it is also, in a way, disrespectful of the developer, who is the client, who has also certain ideas. It's disrespectful of the end user, what their desires are. So I think it's important to bring all these people together around the table. Yes, educate them a little bit, because we are professionals. We know a lot. We simply work for our whole study or professional life. We work on the built environment. So we do know more about housing than the end tenant. We can give good advice. But we have to do that in dialogue, and we have to educate, we have to convince, and ultimately we have to kind of also create products that are robust enough to deal with changes.